Hi everyone. Today I'm going to share with you how we're going to make a snow globe. We're going to start with two pieces of paper. You can use whatever size you want. I'm using paper that's about the size of my hand. I am using one piece that's a little bit thicker. If you have access to that, try and find it. If not, that's okay too, but you will need two pieces. So I'm just going to start by making sure that they're the same size. So I'm just going to trace the smaller one on the larger one, or you can just hold both of your papers right on top of each other and just trim out a smaller size. So I'm gonna do that first, and then I'm gonna set the thinner paper aside, and I'm going to be using some watercolor paints on my thicker paper. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make a circular shape. You can use anything that you might have to help at your house that's circular shape to help you, or you can just eyeball it. I'm not making a totally enclosed circle. Instead, it's going to be more like a dome shape. So I'm going to use the flat side of my paper, and I'm going to draw from this edge up and around and back down to the same edge. So it's going to look something like this. Notice it kind of goes out just slightly, goes up, and then it'll come back down. And I'm drawing really light and sketchy with my line. I like to say draw light until it's right. And then once you have a line that you're happy with, you can go on and make it a little bit, just a smidge darker, so it's easier for you to follow it. And then if you made any extra lines, you can erase those so they're not in your way. Okay, so now that I have that done, we're gonna do something with our watercolor that is a technique called wet on wet. And if you don't have watercolor, that's okay. You can use markers. If you have markers, sometimes markers can be water soluble. That means you can color with a marker, and then with your brush you can paint over the top, and the ink from the marker will start to spread. So you can test out markers you might have at home to see if that will work for you. I don't have any of those, so I can't show you. All I have are permanent markers, but you can experiment and see if it works. If you don't have either of those things, you can use crayons or colored pencils to add color to this background. Now, we will make this look like it's snowing. So if you're using crayons, you might want to add some circles all around this page and color around those circles so part of your paper stays white. Look at my cat is trying to say hello. Okay, and another thing, if you are using watercolor with me, you can use a white crayon or oil pastel to make your snow. So to do that, I'm just going to make small dots all around my snow globe. If you don't have access to these things to add snow, don't worry. We can always collage snow on top using some cut paper and glue, or we can just add it with a material when we have access to them. Okay, so once you have that done, I'm going to get back to how I said we're going to do a wet on wet technique. So this means that we're going to apply our wet watercolor to a surface that's already wet. So I'm just using a brush to, that's already had a little bit of blue on it, no big deal. I'm just going to spread water. Notice I'm not dipping into my paint yet. I'm just spreading water all over this snow globe. This will be the outside of my snow globe. And once I have that set, I'm going to be dripping some of my color onto here so it can kind of spread and make a galaxy sort of appearance on its own. So using my watercolor, I'm going to stick with blues. So I'm going to use these two here and maybe a little bit of this blue violet that I have as well. So I'm loading up some water in those pans so I can have a really wet color, and I can start to just very gently add that to my snow globe. Notice I'm not doing a lot of brushing. I'm just gently dabbing where the surface is already wet, and it starts to bleed on its own. So when watercolor spreads like that, it kind of looks almost feathery. That's called bleeding. And you can do that again with the same color, or you can use a slightly different shade. I like to use colors that are in the same color family, so they mix well together. Those are colors that might be beside each other in the rainbow or on the color wheel. So I'm just sticking with blues right now. And I'm going to use my brush to help spread this around. If you get out of your line, don't worry. We will be cutting this out. So don't worry if your watercolor drips out of the border that you created. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish adding my color here. I'm going to have some areas that might look darker, some areas that might look lighter. I can add more water to make a darker area lighter. I can dry my brush off and get paint to add to make it look darker. Okay, and once I have that full, I'm just gonna let it dry. And I'll show you how we are going to create the details that will be the house or the trees that will go inside our snow globe. Okay, so I have that set now. I'm just using a little bit of water on my brush to help blend my colors together a little bit more. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm gonna set it aside. Okay, so I'm gonna let this dry. And I'm gonna go back to that smaller page that I created here. And for this part, we're gonna need scissors and a pencil. We're gonna be adding details that will just look like the interior of a snow globe. So you might be adding a house, you might be adding trees. There's a little carriage and a horse here. You can add whatever it is that you want. I'm gonna show you how to add a house and some trees. So what you're gonna wanna do is try and make this the same width as the arch that you drew on your first page. And we're gonna start just by making a line here that will look like the snow on the bottom. And then you can start to add maybe some trees or a house. I'm gonna start with a house first. And for my house, I'm just gonna make a big old rectangle. And then I'm gonna start to add a roof. This is sort of like a trapezoid shape. And then maybe I'll add a chimney here. Okay. I'm gonna add some details like a doorway, windows, and now I'm gonna add some trees. For my trees, I want to be able to cut these out, so I'm not gonna draw my trees that look like this because that would be really hard to cut out. Instead, I'm gonna start with a wider tree. So at the top, I'll have these lines that sort of wisp down, and then I'll come back, and then I'll wisp down again, and then I'll come back, and down again, and then eventually I'll be right at the bottom there, and I'll connect it with a trunk. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Maybe this tree will be a little bigger. Notice every time I move down on my tree, that trapezoid shape is getting wider. Great. And then if I wanted to add one in the background of the house, I could just start to make that shape up a little taller. And then eventually the house overlaps it. Okay, so now that I have that added, I can either leave it this black and white, and if you want to leave it black and white, you can use a marker to trace over your lines. I'm just going to use a marker to trace over my house. And the outline edge of my trees. Awesome. Okay. Once I have this done, I'm going to use some colored pencils I have to add some color. And that's optional. You could leave it black and white, or you can add some color. That's your choice. Okay. I'm going to erase some extra pencil lines.